beginning of the 1980s. The ideas of the intellectuals who were fighting for human rights and the preservation of the national identity didn't find any noticeable support in society as a whole. The rank-and-file Soviet citizens look back on the times of Brezhnev's rule as a period of peace and relative stability. The citizens of the Soviet Ukraine could take pride in their smaller motherland. The Ukraine was placed second best in the Soviet Union in terms of the economy and production. Its political influence remained very strong, and many Ukrainians enjoyed fame and prestige. An outstanding engineer, Eugene Patton, who died in 1953, was a pioneer in the field of electric welding and bridge construction. Airplanes designed by Oleg Antonov, the famous ANs, became the trademark of the Soviet aviation industry. Today, Antonov's enterprises are still the pride of the independent Ukraine. They produce the world's largest cargo aircraft, Ruslan and Mriya. Long before Antonov, a Kievite, Ihor Sikorsky, was renowned in the field of aircraft construction. He designed his famous airplanes, the Russian Hero, and the gigantic four-engine craft Ilya Muromets, just before the outbreak of the First World War. Following his emigration to the USA, Sikorsky constructed the first helicopter in the world, which proved to be extremely efficient in the Second World War. Regularly updated, Sikorsky's helicopters are still in service in the US Armed Forces. Ukrainian film directors also succeeded in winning fame. Paradyanov, Ilenko and Osika represented the Ukrainian cinematographic school both in the Soviet Union and abroad by their respective films The Shadows of Forgotten Forefathers, The White Bird with the Black Mark and The Stone Cross. From the end of the 1970s, the inefficiency of the Soviet Union was becoming increasingly obvious. Although the official propaganda kept reporting on its achievements, the economy was stricken by stagnation, while the Cold War's arms race had exhausted it still further. The intervention of Soviet troops in Afghanistan and the introduction of martial law in Poland marred the idealized image of communism in the West. These and other reasons forced the Soviet leadership to change course. The guarantor of the changes was to become the new Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, who was elected in 1985. His reforms were based upon ideas of perestroika and glasnost, that is to say, upon the radical transformation of the country's political and economic system alongside a greater openness and transparency of public life. The reforms were intended to modernize the Soviet Union, to strengthen the state's economy, and to make society more democratic and less repressive. However, a staggering blow that befell the country soon compromised the reforms and accelerated the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was also a tremendous shock for the rest of the world. On the 26th of April 1986, in the town of Pripyat, 130 kilometers to the northeast of Kiev, a nuclear reactor exploded at the Chernobyl atomic power station. Over 50 tons of radioactive substances were released into the atmosphere. The contamination zone, vaster than that of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, spread over the Chernobyl area, then over Belarusia, Scandinavia and other European countries. More than 30 people were killed immediately by the explosion. A further 100,000 were evacuated from the contamination zone. It is still impossible to estimate more or less precisely all the long-term after-effects of the disaster. The authorities attempted to conceal the scale of the disaster for a long time. On the 1st of May, when the radiation level in Kiev reached its peak, a mass demonstration to celebrate the May Day holiday, with school children's mandatory participation, was arranged. In a television address, Gorbachev referred to the nuclear disaster as an accident. Official confirmation of the accident only came on the 9th day after the explosion. You all know that a serious misfortune has happened to us, a serious accident in the Chernobyl atomic power station. This disaster is a painful experience for the Soviet people and has shocked the international community. The cynical lies of the party leadership, together with the hypocrisy of the new policy of glasnost, urged the people to take that glasnost into their own hands. The Chernobyl disaster quickened public activity, which eventually exceeded the limits set down by perestroika. The reforms only accelerated the centrifugal processes in the Union's republics, which were spiraling out of Moscow's control. Although the Ukraine was not in the front line of the ongoing changes, as the Baltic republics were the focal point of change for the time being, still, the country's political and economic importance made a decisive impact on the disintegration of the Soviet Empire. More and more organizations appeared in the Ukraine. At first they were mainly ecological ones, but later those calling for the preservation of the native language and culture were formed. The movement soon assumed the character of another nationalist renaissance. The demands which were put forward included granting the Ukrainian language official status, revealing all the victims of Stalinist purges, rehabilitating the writers repressed in the 1930s and publishing their books, and last but not least, breaking the conspiracy of silence concerning the Great Famine. The year 1987 saw the commencement of the release of political prisoners from jails and camps. Levko Lukyanenko was elected the head of the Ukrainian Helsinki Union, and Vyacheslav Chornovil and the Horin brothers contributed to the compilation of the Declaration of Principles, a program that contained, along with cultural demands, a number of political demands, such as the transformation of the Soviet Union into a confederation of sovereign states, democratic elections, the transition to a market economy, cultural and religious autonomy, and the guarantee of the independence of the courts. These were the programme's minimum demands, later adopted by most other reform groups in the Ukraine. The members of those groups represented a wide range of political backgrounds, from intellectuals to the 60s, from young party members to extreme nationalists. Anti-communist organizations, with their unambiguous demand for independence, had had but marginal importance before 1990. The election campaign to Parliament and to local self-government bodies consolidated and mobilized the opposition forces. According to the patterns of popular fronts in the Baltic republics, the Ukrainian opposition movement Ruch had been meant to serve the cause of perestroika. The Constituent Congress of Ruch, held in September 1989 in Kiev, voiced clear-cut demands of unconditional independence. Nevertheless, a program which only envisaged a sovereign and not fully independent state was finally adopted. It meant that the relations between the Ukraine and other Soviet republics would still be determined by a new Union treaty. The formation of Ruch marked a great victory for the opposition. Soon Mikhail Gorbachev dismissed Sherbitsky, the first secretary of the Ukrainian Communist Party Central Committee, and Parliament granted official status to the Ukrainian language. In December 1989,